So go. Welcome back, friends. Today we're reading chapter 5 of Mad Bear. Greenbacks, gold, and a bottle of whiskey. Now we might have a chance to do some medicine that might help out a little. Early one morning, during the 5th spiritual summit, Sandy knocked on Mad Bear's door and gave him an account of a dream she had in the night. Mad Bear came excitedly down the hall to awaken me. Sandy had felt she ought to tell Mad Bear before he left for the cathedral that morning, and Mad Bear could not wait to tell me. She had dreamed of the man with the serpents about his head. There is going to be an important opening for all of us in intercultural relations, she had told Mad Bear. But it will be only an opening, and we will have to follow up somehow. You don't have to know who this man is, though you won't have to look for him when you get there this morning. I see him coming to you. He'll approach you directly and initiate the whole thing. This will be the first thing that happens when you enter the cathedral this morning. We don't know who this man is, but he's a somewhat slight man. An Oriental man, I think. He has a suit and he wears glasses, and in my dream I see this man with spirit snake beings circling about his head. Mad Bear, of course, did know who this man was, and he could not stop talking about him, all the way through our hasty breakfast and our uptown trip in the van. We know who he is, he went on repeating, and now we'll find out something more about him. We were hoping something like this would happen, right? Didn't I tell you? He was certain that the man from Japan would approach him as we entered the cathedral. The first thing to happen, just as Sandy predicted. The moment we pulled up to the curb, Mad Bear hopped up and bounded up the stairs. The man from Japan was nowhere in sight. The first thing that happened the moment we arrived was something other than what Sandy had predicted, and something quite different from what any of us could have expected. There were 3 angry men standing in the lobby waiting for the first natives to arrive, and they confronted Mad Bear and Beeman Logan in a most ungentle manner. Now you'll just have to hold it right here, and we're going to talk about this, they said, holding several large sheets of paper in front of Beeman and Mad Bear. Somehow it felt as though underneath their coats they wore holsters with pistols. This is going to stop. This is going to be stopped right here and now. This is no light matter. When the United Nations is involved like this, we are going to take this very seriously indeed. I looked over Mad Bear's shoulder. These were found outside here, they went on, not allowing anyone a chance to respond. Right here outside on the grounds. We don't know who is responsible, but we're going to find out. Where else have you people been putting these things around? If you know, you say so. We'll find out, and we're going to get to them, and it's all over. It's all over for you people. Mad Bear now had one of the papers in his hands. He was looking at it with a frown. They were hastily made up posters calling for a mass Native American demonstration of protest at the United Nations on United Nations Day. Now, we just can't have this kind of thing here at the cathedral or the UN or anywhere else. If this is your attitude, if this is the way you operate, why, you people are just going to have to leave here. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you people. Mad Bear finally interrupted. I have to tell you that none of our native people made any of these signs or had anything to do with this thing. None of our people who are participating in this spiritual summit have anything like this in mind or would even consider such an idea. This is directly contrary to our purpose. We're spiritual leaders with spiritual responsibilities, and we're here on a spiritual mission. We are all pleased to be here, and we're pleased with the way things are going. We disapprove of this thing as strongly as you do. It hurts us more than anybody. In fact, it would be my guess that this might have been something aimed against us, to work against our purpose here. In fact, I think I might even have some idea who could be behind this, though I shouldn't just say yet. The men were reluctant to be convinced. They looked at Mad Bear suspiciously, as though he were making some skillful sort of cover-up. The 2 natives who had arrived with us had been walking around the cathedral grounds and the surrounding streets while this talk was continuing, and they returned with many more such posters. The expressions of the faces of the 3 men now turned to genuine anger, and the man who was doing all the talking started up again. Now see, this is continuing to go on. You people just may be arrested. This is inciting, but we're not the ones doing this. This is inciting riots, and you people are subject to arrest. Up walked the Japanese man with the business suit, the bald head, and the glasses. He had been nowhere in sight, but he seemed to know exactly what had been said. His words sounded stern and insistent, and immediately his interpreter put them into English. This time his interpreter was a young, attractive Japanese woman. These people have told you they're not involved with this thing, and why do you go on with it? The natives are not causing any problems here, and you are causing problems for them. Now, we're about to have an important private meeting, so stop this unnecessary talk and leave the native delegates alone. Somehow, this was totally effective. Apparently, there was something about this man's presence or position that was persuasive enough to close the matter, and the three men simply turned and walked away. Or, I wondered, could they perhaps have seen the serpents? Now that that's over, he said to Madbear, through his interpreter, I would like to have a talk with you before this morning's activities get underway. I knew this was going to happen. Madbear beamed. Of course, he replied. Let us quickly find a place to talk. We found a small room in the basement with about a dozen folding chairs stacked in one corner. We arranged 7 chairs in a circle, closed the door, and sat down. At first, the talk was rather trivial. Polite greetings were exchanged and then introductions. The man from Japan had the title of Reverend, at least in English. He was a high Shinto priest whose headquarters was in Tokyo. The young Japanese woman was a journalist who lived and worked in New York City. Madbear said a few words about Beeman Logan and himself and gave the names of the rest of us. Now, said the Shinto priest, there is something I am interested to say to you and your group. First, I'd like to just make one comment here, Madbear interrupted. He looked around at the rest of us, as though about to share something personal. I've noticed this man from the very beginning, and was hoping for this chance to talk. This man has power, and I see something powerful about this man. This is just for the information for the rest of you. He looked directly at the priest. And one of our people, you may not see her with us, but she is with us. She sees many things, and she told me just this morning before we left. She spoke of you as I had seen you, and that we would have a meeting that could be an opening door. Madbear paused for the interpreter to translate. The Shinto priest nodded, understanding, but otherwise there was no reaction. I just wanted to say that we're happy to meet you and to have this chance to communicate. We must not be gratified, said the priest. He paused, and we sat for a moment in silence. Perhaps he was waiting for some agreement from the others. This is a nice program here, he went on, and we have seen so many nice people. There has been such nice pageantry, and much is yet to come. We will continue to see all these beautiful costumes and ornaments, and the climax of this whole affair will be the ceremony at the United Nations on Friday morning. It will be just that, a ceremony. And if it is satisfying in itself, then it will be less than useful. We may all go home, and we may say, we had a nice summit, and we prepared a good statement. Next year, perhaps, we can meet again. But our work here is something other than a pleasant experience. If our work is only to be satisfied, then we should leave this place with only memories, and the hope of enjoying something similar again sometime. Madbear only nodded and said nothing, but his agreement was unmistakable. Now, what is the real purpose for which we all have gathered at this time? The priest continued. What is the usefulness of our encounter? What are we to do with this occasion once we have parted and gone our separate ways? We must resolve here and now to maintain this connection, to maintain the communication. We must expect to act together in a powerful unison, so we must plan to travel continually, to meet and join forces. The The duty of the religious leaders and spiritual representatives of the people is not to perform ceremonies only. It is to guide the people to save their world. This cannot be done by any other leaders, however they may hope to help. It will not be done by executives or politicians. It must be done by those who will be inclined to come together for no other purpose than to represent the hearts and minds of everyone. The divine order caring for this planet approaches us now. They are closer to this incarnate plane of our earth than they have ever been before. Yet they require of us who are in physical form to do the physical work. It is our karma, anyway, and now it becomes our opportunity. For this we must travel. We must get together physically. We must travel because it must be done cooperatively, jointly and with teamwork among cultures. It is not to the point to communicate technologically. We must know each other. We must have a close personal contact and a direct and ever-building awareness of our group unity. Both Chief Beeman Logan and Madbear agreed out loud. This was indeed their work, or at least their goal, that the Shinto priest was talking about. They had been long traveling in their own country to unite their people behind this cause, and as they worked for intertribal unity, they dreamed and talked about intercultural unity. They had been long striven to communicate with people of other lands through the United Nations, and they had traveled to distant shores to meet with many people of many races and cultures. Madbear had often spoken to me about the global responsibility of all spiritual spokespersons and representatives. So then it is up to us, said the priest. It is our work, and either we will do it, or it will not be done. If we can agree that this entire event, even our official reception at the United Nations on Friday, is nothing other than a stepping stone. If we can resolve here and now that we will continue after this event and this gathering has ended, then we will have succeeded in our meeting here this morning. Well, we can consider that accomplished, Madbear said, but at some point, we're going to have to plan just how we are going to carry this out. The words of the Shinto priest had hit home with Madbear. No idea could be more exciting to him, I knew, than the idea of medicine people all over the planet joining forces. But to Madbear, it was never inappropriate to talk about the strategies and the practicalities. The cooperative effort of the spiritual leaders of the world would require the wherewithal to travel and communicate. And the natives had questions about the almost unlimited amount of money that would be needed to carry out this work. One of our party felt compelled, while they were on this subject, to speak to a more immediate problem. Many of the natives who had barely managed to get here were now out of funds, and yet had to spend the rest of this week in the big city and then somehow make it home again. But the Shinto priest was hopeful. Money, he was certain, whatever that was to mean in the future, would definitely serve to help carry out this work and not stand in the way of it. If millions are needed to bring together this planet's healers and helpers for their collective work, then millions will appear. And if it should require hundreds of millions, he claimed, then hundreds of millions will appear. Or if hundreds of billions, then that will become available. Whatever power and resource is required will be liberated for this purpose, he told us, as a result of the upcoming inevitable changes in the planetary economy. Something to help with the immediate needs of the native representatives now gathered here would become apparent tomorrow. On that positive note, we closed our brief basement meeting, shook hands, and went upstairs to observe the day's events in the main hall of the cathedral. On the following morning, the Shinto priest took Madbear aside and gave him a solid gold medallion, a bottle of whiskey, and 10 crisp $100 bills. Through his interpreter, he told Madbear that the money needed to carry out the eventual work of which he spoke would be long in coming, and yet it had already become an inevitability. The gold medallion was a special gift for Madbear, he said, and the money and the whiskey were for the natives to do with as they wished. "Look at this!" Madbear exclaimed, returning to where I waited beside the front steps of the cathedral. He showed me the money, being careful to be inconspicuous. "Can you beat this? This is going into the native fund. $1,000. All in brand spanking new bills. I almost hate to have to put it in that drawer. But what puzzles me, he gave us whiskey. A bottle of whiskey for the native delegation. Now, that's a mystery. Just what the meaning behind that is, we're going to have to put our heads together and give it some thought. I just thanked him for it and tried to keep a straight face. Then I got to thinking about it. There might have been some purpose in it, something symbolic that he understood. Whiskey symbolized the downfall of our people, in a way, and it's responsible for weakening our culture and holding down our people even today. "Where's the whiskey now?" I asked. "Well, it's nowhere now. Still, it might provide an opportunity of some kind." Anyas and I made the trip back downtown to the hotel to add the money to our drawer behind the cashier's cage. When we returned to the large hall of the cathedral and took our place beside Madbear, the morning proceedings had already begun. Madbear whispered in my ear. He had spoken with the Hopi elders, and together they had arrived at a plan that might provide some good medicine for this alcohol issue. "But you told me the whiskey's already gone." "Well, at the moment it is. We've put it out of existence. But we just can't leave it at that. So we'll have it back when we're ready to do our ceremony." "That'll be the last thing we do here. I mean, we can't control all the booze in the world. So just to make one bottle of whiskey disappear, that doesn't really serve any purpose. But now, we might have a chance to do some medicine that might help out a little. At least for our people." Each day of the summit conference, more delegates had arrived from out of state and out of the country. The native delegation had grown, and we had booked nearly 12 rooms in the Lexington Hotel. Most of the natives brought only themselves and had no funds for food or lodging. Unlike most of the other delegates, the native leaders represented no organized religious order with property, status, collections, and treasuries. For many days, I had busied myself with fundraising, and fortunately, we had acquired many supporters. Participants and attendees had learned of the natives' needs, and those I had contacted earlier by phone had mailed checks. Sometimes people found me during the events at the cathedral and handed me donations for the Native Fund. One day, by midday, I had received the results of several local groups' collections, and during the lunch break, I looked for Madbear among the crowd. "I have over $1,000 in my pocket," I told him. "I think I'd better go back downtown to the hotel and put this in the safety box." "Okay, but you take Anyas along with you." "Well, I'll be okay. I thought I'd take a taxi down there and then come back on the bus or the subway." "But you still take Anyas. That's our way. We never go alone. There's never a need to. Anyas knows that, and he's used to it. That's partly what he's here for." I looked long for Anyas, and when I finally found him, he did not want to leave. "I have to take care of this," I insisted, "and now's the time to do it. Just before the afternoon starts up again." "No, I'll go," he said. "Just wait. I just want to wait. I was talking to someone over somewhere. I got distracted." "But you can find them as soon as we get back. It won't take too long, just down and back." "No, that's not it. It's just that I got distracted." He looked about anxiously. He seemed puzzled and disoriented. At my urging, he left with me. I could have done this alone, but I wanted to follow Madbear's wishes. We went downtown by taxi and came back on the train. Anyas looked increasingly worried, and I questioned him. Finally, he admitted to me that he had lost Madbear's medicine case. It had been his job to carry the medicine case wherever Madbear was moving among the people, and now Anyas had lost it. It was a grave situation. I knew it was crucial that the medicine case be protected, and that others be protected from it. It had been doctored, as Madbear had put it, and Anyas had been doctored so that he could handle it. "Don't tell Bear," Anyas kept saying. "We've got to find it. I know I just set it on this chair behind me when I was talking to someone. Then I turned around and it was gone. I can't understand it. Just don't tell Bear." "We've got to tell him," I said. "We can look, but if we don't find it, we really have to tell him. You know what could happen if someone got their hands on that satchel and what's in it." "I'm scared," he confessed. "We just gotta get it back." But before we could find it, Mad Bear found us. Anyas had no medicine case, and immediately Mad Bear knew. He watched Anyas as Anyas tried to explain. "Stay with him," Mad Bear instructed me. "Something's wrong with him. Something's been done to him. I think I have a feeling what's going on here." In a moment, he was out of sight. I stayed with Anyas until the end of the afternoon, and everyone left the cathedral, and the two of us went back to our room. Immediately, Anyas lay down on his bed. "I don't feel too good," he muttered. I reminded him that we all had tickets to the closing banquet that was to begin in just a couple hours at the Waldorf Astoria, just up the street. Anyas jumped up, held his head as though he were dizzy, and fell back onto the bed. "What's the matter?" I asked. He did not answer. He only stood up, took off his clothes, and got under his covers. Then he got up, got dressed, and laid back down. There was a knock at the door. "I don't know," Anyas mumbled. "I don't know what." "Something's wrong with Anyas," I whispered to Mad Bear, standing in the doorway. He keeps lying down and getting up again, and Mad Bear pushed aside me and stared at Anyas, and Anyas tightly closed his eyes. Mad Bear walked up and glared at him as though he were trying to peer right through his belly. Then he motioned me toward the door. "Leave us for a moment," he said. "I've got work here." After only a few minutes, Mad Bear came out and we went to his room. Sitting on his bed was his medicine case. "He'll be all right pretty quick," he told me, "but we'll let him stay in so he doesn't have to deal with all the people at the banquet." Anyways, I got my bag here. I had to use a little medicine and track it down myself. I found the guy, a white guy, and he'd had his hands in it, so I had to work on him. At first, I suspected that native-looking guy that's been wandering around up there looking like he's trying to cause trouble. You've seen that guy in the big black hat? Between all of us here from our various tribes, we should just know about everybody. Anyway, he may not have anything to do with it, although I think he's up to no good. I'm not sure if he did it or not. That young white guy had to have some help. Somebody or something got to Anyas. Got a hold of him. You know what I'm saying? That's how he lost his bearings, or got overshadowed. A couple times you guys came down here, right? Maybe he seemed alright to you then, but I don't think he could have found his way by himself. So it wasn't his fault, really. Yet, if he'd been on guard, really diligent, like he's been taught, it might not have happened. He'll learn. Eventually, he'll be able to deal with this stuff. At least I hope so. Because he can't escape the challenge. Not with the path he's already set out on. Anyway, this other young guy, he might have some others working with him. You know what I found out? Because he was after my medicine, and I had to have quite a talk with him. He's the guy responsible for those protest posters that they found pulling all around the cathedral. None of our native people had anything to do with that. Not any part of this spiritual delegation, anyway. This young white guy, he doesn't strike me as being evil, really. I had a heavy talk with him, and he's leaving. I think he's sorry, in a way. He's not really mean-hearted, but I think he's disappointed, too. He's after something for his own ego. Power or control or what have you. A little limelight and recognition. So something's got a hold on him, too. This kind of ego thing, it makes it easy. These people, when they go for power and glory and like that, they become an easy target. Then they end up serving some agenda of some other devious outfit that they're not really even a part of. Just being used. Most people don't know that, how it works. The Haudenosaunee delegation, with the exception of Anyas, walked together to the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. A lavish banquet, held in the Waldorf's extravagant banquet room on the eve of the official United Nations Day reception, was the consummating event for this fifth Spiritual Summit conference. It was a monumental affair with all the religious delegations and their associates, as well as hundreds of others who had brought tickets to attend it. At his request, I sat beside Mad Bear, to his immediate right, as usual, while the others who had arrived with us split up to join the various other tables. Our hosts were encouraging everyone to mix it up. reminding us that this social event provided, at last, an opportunity to really get to know people from other countries and cultures. Mad Bear and I began an immediate friendship with a Hindu delegate at our table as we waited for the seats to fill. If this was a social event, it was also an elaborate one. Enormous arrangements of roses and candles formed the centerpiece of each of the many large round tables. At each place setting was another candle, a small white votive candle in a clear white cup painted, "One is the human spirit," and there were printed programs listing the order of the proceedings, including the opening prayer and blessing, the musical entertainment, the speakers who were to offer their after-dinner remarks, and a closing candlelight ceremony. As the waiters began to light the centerpiece candles, someone stepped onto the speaker's platform to instruct us that we were to save the little votive candles, one for each person, for the closing ceremony. "Then what about these other candles?" Mad Bear whispered. "They're sitting right here burning in these flowers. What kind of setup is this?" But the lush red roses looked impressive, I thought to myself, and they smelled beautiful. The first event of the evening, even before the banquet was begun, was a Haudenosaunee prayer conducted by Chief Beeman Logan and Mad Bear. Again, as at the beginning of the week's events at the cathedral, the Haudenosaunee people were recognized as the caretakers of this northeastern land, if not in a political sense, at least in a spiritual and historical sense. The people of the native nations were thus acknowledged hosts of the peoples from the four directions and from across the great waters. And again, after only a few introductory words in English, they each spoke in their own language, because these were prayers and invocations, and there were no translations. Dinner music was provided by Ravi Shankar and his two musicians, and as they began to play, the waiters began to serve the meal. It was not long before we noticed that the candles at our table were burning our roses. Mad Bear had been right. It was an impractical arrangement. Then the music was momentarily interrupted, and an announcement was made from the speaker's platform that all centerpiece candles on all the tables should please be extinguished. "It has just been brought to our attention," said the speaker, "that the candles are drying out the leaves and petals of these poor, beautiful roses, and the flames are now beginning to scorch them. As you know, this is a meeting of compassion and understanding, and so I'm sure we ought to be willing to sacrifice our decorative candle lights as a decent gesture of mercy and thoughtfulness for the roses." "But the roses are dying anyways," Mad Bear called out, rather loudly, in fact, as though he hoped his voice might reach the man behind the microphone. Several heads turned. A few people nodded in acknowledgement, but most simply stared at him. "I feel like going up there to that microphone," Mad Bear said to me, "and remind these people what they're trying so hard not to notice. We're ignoring the fact that these are not flowers here. They're pieces of flowers cut off from their roots and brought in here to die right in front of us while we're eating. People make an effort not to notice. You can sense dying if you attend to it. It's the first thing I noticed when we walked in here. Hundreds of flowers dying in this room. Well, I'm not going to say anything, but I'd sure just like to bring it to the people's attention so they'd have to think about it." I glanced at our Hindu friend sitting beside us, recalling the many leaves and garlands I had seen presented to the Babas, Gurus, and Swamis in India, and the thousands of flower blossoms laid down in brilliant profusion along the pathways and hallways of the temples and ashrams. "Bouquets and cut flowers might not be so wrong in themselves," Mad Bear continued. "These things can be done, I guess, at least if they're done for a sacred purpose in the right way, with an offering and devotion, and if the living plants agree. I myself gather herbs. These things can help us, but they are living beings. Well, at least somebody noticed something here and thought about it a bit. It's just that people, most all people in the modern world, quit paying attention to living things. They probably wouldn't hear them anyway. They probably wouldn't even listen. People work hard to achieve insensitivity. It takes a lot of practice to build up these attention blocks. Your people actually work at this. That's what gets me." The week's events came to a close with a formal reception in the United Nations building in which representatives chosen by the conference delegates met with the top UN officials to present their communication. Seating in the reception room was limited to those chosen representatives, and most of the delegates and the rest of us sat in other rooms to watch the proceedings on a closed-circuit television. Since it is evident, the communication pointed out, that what we have achieved in technological developments and in international trade and global economy are not in themselves sufficient to ensure the safety or well-being of either our planet or its inhabitants. It is essential that we employ the vast resources of our religious and spiritual experience and knowledge. The communication proposed that this international body recognize these representative delegates as an unofficial advisory council attached to the United Nations as a resource for spiritual guidance. You know, something weird just happened in there, though it didn't really surprise me. Just as we were getting started, this guy shows up. You remember that strange man I pointed out to you? He looks native, well, he is native, but none of us know him. We still can't figure him out. Anyways, he shows up in there. Where he came from, how he got in there, I've got no idea. I know what you mean, I said. I've seen him several times. Alex talked to him. What did he say to the guy? Well, he was trying to start trouble when those Jains were up there in the front of the cathedral. I guess you could say Alex told him to leave. And he actually left? I reflected on the man in the black hat standing with his back to the stairs. Yeah, he left. I think he just wanted to get some attention. Yeah, well, the man's got nobody. Whoever he is. The man's got medicine. No one had gotten up to speak yet, but a couple of our main speakers, they started coughing. I looked up and spotted him right away, and I knew what he was up to. I started fishing in my pockets for my bear medicine, but I couldn't find it. I generally carry a little on me. You know, those little sticks, like I gave you a piece to chew before that meeting. But I couldn't find it. Well, Swami Satchitatanda, he was sitting right here on the other side of me, and, he picked up on this whole thing. He took my arm and he plunked this little jar in my hand. It was that Chinese stuff. Some of that so-called tiger stuff. You may know the stuff. Comes in a little jar. Fantastic smelling. The vapors penetrate right into you. Tiger balm, I said. That's the stuff. And I knew just what to do with it. I opened the jar and handed it to the ones who needed help and told them to quickly rub plenty onto their necks. You know, there's really something to that stuff. Either that or he'd done something to it. But then I found my own medicine, just a little piece in this top pocket, and I broke it so they could share it. I told them how to bite down onto it. That man gave me a hard look, and then he just left. Just walked out as though he'd lost interest in the whole. He stopped himself and looked around. I thought perhaps he suddenly sensed that the strange man was listening. But no one was around. Just a minute, he said, walking away. You wait here. They're looking for me, but they don't know where I'm at. No problem, I can find them easy. I waited, wondering whether that man might be doing something to Mad Bear. But when he came back, he was grinning. Look, we gotta go. You hang around here. We got a little something we gotta take care of, and now's the time to do it. Just some of our own people and the Hopis and all. We're taking Grandfather David. I supposed it had something to do with what he had just been telling me, but I decided not to ask. No, it's not that, he said, responding to my thoughts. It's that other affair we were talking about before. We've still got to deal with that thing, so we're going to bring it back so we can send it off. That was our decision. I'd like to take you along, but then some of the others might... Anyways, I'll tell you later. And you can join us this evening with Grandfather David. We're all getting together down in his room, our whole native delegation. Old Grandfather David talked for hours that night, and the longer he talked, and the later it became, the livelier David became. It seemed, in fact, that he grew younger as the night wore on. Mad Bear and I had been among the first to arrive. We knocked on his hotel door, and we were let in to wait with a few others already there, while those who were caring for David were helping him to rest and dress in peace in an adjoining room. Nearly a dozen of us had crowded into his room by the time he was brought in to join us, and he had to be carefully guided between bed, chairs, feet, and crossed legs. It began as a group conversation. People talked about the events of the past few days, about that whiskey bottle, and about the ceremony on its behalf that had taken place on that afternoon down by the water. The disposition of that bottle had been partly David's idea. He had joined in the prayers with the others at the edge of the Atlantic, and administered the final invocation and cornmeal offering as they had sent the bottle afloat across the great waters. It was over this very ocean, from that strange land to the east, that the native people had first received the catastrophic gift of firewater. David, I knew, could not in his blindness have seen the bottle as it bobbed in the water and was taken by the undertow, but perhaps in his own mind he held the strongest vision of the ritual. That evening, at first, David joined only intermittently in the group conversation. He sat stone still in his chair, mostly staring into space and occasionally turning his head in the direction of the voice he was listening to. I wondered if he had some sense of how many people were packed into his room, if he had any mental image at all of the circumstance, or, if so, how it all looked to him. But somewhere in the midst of all the chatting, he seemed to grasp that he had a room full of listeners and that many eyes were upon him, and he began to speak. This time it was neither a lecture nor prayer. He simply talked, and whatever message was conveyed was implied by his manner as well as by his words. He talked about his childhood and his earliest encounters with the white folks, and he talked of his wife and his own family and about his life in Hopi Land and about his many travels. These were stories, all stories, and most of what he had chose to tell was as funny as it was true. He had, no doubt, told these stories many times over the decades, but if anyone here had heard them before, he or she laughed at them again. He had a sharp sense of humor and a sharp memory as well for a man over 100 years of age. Grandfather David sat up in his chair and folded his arms across his chest and patted his shoulders with his hands. Well, I'm talking English too, and that's not even my language. If I was to talk Hopi, well, you might just enjoy the heck out of it. You'd get it from my real view of it. Except, see, you wouldn't understand it. Well, it might be a good thing, after all. You know, when I was a young boy, I was a hostile. That was our label, and the name we were given. That was one of my first English words, but I didn't get the meaning. Well, I thought it might have meant peace, because we Hopi, that's our name for ourselves. Hopi means peace. Well, Hopi sounds a little like hostile, but not too much. So in English, we knew one word, and we called ourselves the Hostiles. But then, pretty soon, see, it didn't make any sense. Well, if we were so nice and hostile, how come they were trying to run us off? Then later, we understood. With that hostile notion, if they believed it, they could get us out and take the land, and not even share it. We never heard of such a thing, and we weren't prepared for it. Yet, we are still there, just as we always were, thousands of years before that Bering Strait or any crossing. That's our history. So, we refused to learn English or to learn their ways. We didn't want to be taken over and done away with in that way. Those days, nobody learned English. We resisted. Only I had to learn it because I was supposed to be our spokesman. I was one of the only ones. People heard me speak, and they were surprised. That was in the 1800s, long time ago. They used to talk in front of me, terrible talk, and I understood. One day, I was walking pretty far and I walked up to this old trading post. It was run by white folks, and a fairly good-sized place. I wanted to buy one of them lanterns they used to have, so I went on up. One old guy was sitting on a stool outside, just sitting by the door. There was a blanket hanging or a curtain or something for a door, and he hollered inside when he saw me coming. Then I could hear him when I got closer. He just said, Just some old Injun. Never saw him before. He looks about as stupid as all the rest. Well, so I played along and I went up and pointed at that hanging door and I said, That's what they used to say to us when they thought they were speaking our language. So we went on in and there was another man and a woman in there. And they all said I looked about as poor as I looked stupid. But I saw a lantern on the shelf and I pointed to it. They mistook me and handed me this funny hat that was up there. So I put it on backward and said, and took it off. Then they were saying things like, these Injuns don't know what they want. Tell them it's pretty and they'll buy anything. Only this one looks like he doesn't even know where he's at or what he's doing. Probably got no money anyway. So I said, and I walked on out. But I went back on the next day to buy the lantern. Same folks in there, and I went on in and I spoke to them and I said, how are you folks this morning? I guess you might remember me. I'm a hostile from away over beyond the third mesa. And I've come all the way back over here with money to buy that fine-looking lantern up there on the shelf. Well, they didn't know what to do. They looked like they'd been struck by lightning. So I said, well, you folks seem so nice and friendly. It seemed a shame not to understand your kind words. I know you folks aren't too keen on learning my language. It's too difficult for you folks. So I went on home last night and learned yours. And without a lantern too. I studied all night. Kinda hurt my eyes. So now we can be friends. Just like brothers and sisters. Seemed they didn't really want to talk anyway. But I did get to buy the lantern. That was a long, long time ago. He paused and pulled a large, round watch from his pocket. Well, speaking of time. He glanced at his watch and jumped to his feet. He looked at all of us sitting there regarding him. Why didn't you tell me? You want to let me keep you up all night? 1:30 in the morning. I could have gone on all night. Well, it looks like I already did. You should have stopped me. Mad Bear grinned and gave me a poke. Whenever there was an excuse to do so, he seemed to be sitting close enough to give me an elbow into my ribs. He can see, he whispered loudly. David can see. People said goodnight to David and to one another and left to return to their own rooms. All except for Mad Bear, who persuaded me to join him for his usual bedtime snack. As we sat in the restaurant across the street, he continued to talk about David. Did you see that? How did he know that? Wasn't that something? He just opened his eyes and he looked at his watch and he could see the time. And did you notice his color, his posture, everything? He really came to life. Energy. That's what it is, all of that good energy. Shows you how these things kind of work. Shows what can happen just given the chance. It had been a significant week for the Native Americans. Significant, it seemed to me, in many important ways. Native American leaders had been long interested in the United Nations, long before its existence, in fact. Ancient prophecies foretold of the tall building of ore and mica, where nations would gather in the land of the Haudenosaunee, on the island now called Manhattan. Their hope of participating in that assembly was more than a dream. It was an instruction. Treaties are, by definition, pacts among sovereign nations, and the state of these treaties and of the Native American nations was an international issue, in their view. One appropriately dealt with by the United Nations. In addition to their human rights appeal to the United Nations, they had a message to communicate in this building of ore and mica. A message that would benefit all the people. A message regarding their own mission and the righteous and honorable custodianship of the life and land of this planet. If there would continue to be a working spiritual advisory group to the United Nations of which traditional Native American spiritual spokespersons were to be a part, then the recognition of this mission, as well as recognition and relief for the native people, would be sure to follow. Politicians and their various mechanisms may come and go, I thought, but the spiritual paths endure forever. The traditional Native Americans are a unified presence here. They were one people, one sacred way. In their own meetings throughout the week, They had agreed upon the importance of presenting themselves as being of one mind. Every resolution and communication was issued by the united voice of a united delegation. A delegation that represented many sovereign nations and tribes and an ancient and enduring culture and tradition. Madbear had seen an opportunity, and he had made the best of it. You know, I had a good talk with the One Horn and the rest of the Hopi elders and some of the elders and spokespersons of the tribes here. It seems they all agree that this is the right time for communicating and sharing with all others, with the peoples of all colors and cultures. This is what I've been hoping for, working for, this acknowledgement and agreement. All the signs point to the correctness of this. Our sacred instructions have told us that when the time is right, we are supposed to communicate, even reveal the records that we have been safekeeping. The One Horn Society is important in this because they are the keepers of the records. That's why it meant so much to me to see a One Horn way up here in our Haudenosaunee country, especially at this time. I asked him if he thought now was the time to release the prophecies, records, and instructions over which his people have maintained custody for all these centuries. You know what he said to me? He said, "It might be now or never. If we don't do it now, I don't know when we would ever have a chance again." It's good, Madbear mused. It's good that it could be seen this way. All these other populations here, all these other races and cultures, the ones we call the invaders, I think that's why they came here. They're here for this learning. Though that's not recognized even to this day. Everything has its spiritual purpose, but it doesn't always unfold. Now the time is getting short. There will always be us, our people and our records and our sacred instructions, but there just might not be the other peoples. Maybe not much longer. With their self-destructive ways, I doubt whether they can survive on this land. That is the end of the chapter again. Nyawa, my friends, for listening.